Hello, everybody, and welcome to Forever Sports. The Springboks gathered yesterday in Johannesburg for the restart, really, of preparation for rugby's greatest rivalry. And the All Blacks are set to land in South African shores in probably about this weekend, would be the guess, ahead of their first game against the DHL Stormers. And whilst they will be down in Cape Town, the Boks will be in Argentina. And at the end of this week, we are expecting a squad announcement of about 26 to 28 players to go over to Argentina for the once-off test on the 8th of August. Rusty basically saying as many as up to 16 or more players could potentially not make the trip over to Argentina, and those players will remain here and continue to prepare for the All Blacks. The first test of the Great Rivalry Tour is on the 22nd of August. 3 tests, obviously, in South Africa. Then we go overseas to the States. So the big question is, who will stay and who will go? And I think the main problem is you've got to try and find a bit of a balance, because you've got 10 players coming back from injury from a Bok perspective, players who are unavailable at some stage. So there are a lot of players who are coming back, and now you've got to make the big decision. Which of these players need game time? Which of the players you have used might need potentially more game time? What combinations would you like to continue testing versus which players do you want to really protect and make sure that no injuries, could become an issue? And whilst there's no guarantee of there not being any injuries within practice, you can try and keep it sometimes a little bit more controlled versus, in test matches where things can happen, tempers can flare, and various different things can happen. Far more, moving parts really within a test match than within a controlled environment. So you've got to try and find that balance, because there are players who are coming back, like Sash Zulu, who they've already said they want to take to Argentina. He's not played rugby in a while. So again, something like Moy van den Berg, you also want to get him out there, because it looks like these players are not going to be available for their unions within the greatest rivalry test or the club matches in that regard. So they're not going to get the chance to play for their franchise. And as a result, Argentina, basically represents the final opportunity for preparation against a non-internal side. Obviously, on Wednesdays, the Boks basically have internal matches against each other, which is often why we have such a big squad, because we can kind of create different combinations, and we can basically have our Springboks starting 15 play against a mock of whatever the opposition's going to do. And those players will basically look to emulate what the opposition's going to do. So if, for example, Sash Zulu is starting in at 10, for example, Marley Box not, he'll be playing opposite him, trying to emulate what a Ruben Love would do, what a Damien McKenzie would do. And they basically look at those sort of clips and try and recreate those pictures. Just a bit of an insight in case you wondered how they kind of prepare. So now it's a big interesting question about who goes and who stays. And what I've done is I basically put together a potential squad, and I'm going to go through, and there obviously looks like immediately when you look at it that there are players who are short. For example, you look at centre saying, how can we just take just one centre? Well, we're not taking just one centre. And when you go over with a smaller squad, for example, let's say we take 26 odd players, which this is, you've only got 3 players who will not be in the match day squad. So you really got to make sure you take a squad of players with variety, so that you can cover multiple positions versus taking just specialists, because that obviously limits what you can and can't take. So let's go through it. So in terms of the props, I've said that we might potentially we might take fewer props, because you've got a Jan Vessels who obviously covers one. But I've basically taken Jan Vessels covering Lucid as well as Hooker, and I've gone with Wilco Low, Zach Porthan, Carly Sardi, Gerard Steenkamp, and Bowen Venter. We could look at leaving one of those props behind. You could leave a Gerard Steenkamp behind, or a Bowen Venter, and basically say Jan Vessels is the loose head option. But I do think that props are being such a specialist position. If somebody goes down in training next week, then you've got a bit of an issue. In terms of, I've left Thomas Latoy behind, in terms of he's played a lot of rugby. Oxencheck coming back from injury, I don't think worth risking him unless he is 100% fit. And, we know that he's basically hopefully back in training, but we're not entirely sure exactly where he is. 22nd of August is just under a month away. So there's plenty of time for Ox to get back to full fitness. I don't think worth the risk. I don't think Thomas Latoy needs any extra minutes. So I think that those are kind of your props you're left with. I would love to see Carly Sardi, Zach Porthan getting a run out. I'd love to see Bowen Venter and Gerard Steenkamp getting an opportunity. I'm saying we potentially might just take Malcolm Marx. Or else we might also just take Johan Grobler, to be honest, depending on whether we feel we need to give more minutes and combination to Malcolm Marx, or whether we want to basically wrap him up and Cotton will leave him behind for a week and send over Johan Grobler, Johan Vessels as an option as well. Obviously, you also got Markham and Staden as an option. Locks, I think that, we'll probably look to take Lewis and the Urban over. to try and get some game time. I'd be quite surprised if they don't kind of go. And I don't think Ruan Nokia necessarily needs extra minutes, especially when you've got a Lord Diaga and a Franco Mossad, who I'm taking. Those are two options in the number 5 jersey. From a loose forwards point of view, again, I think, Sid Khaleesi, I think you want to give game time to. I think Franco Mossad, you want to give game time to. Kubas Visa is another option at 4. Ben Jason Dixon gives you an option at 4, 7, potentially 5 as well. You've also got a Cameron Harnicorn can play 7, 8, 6. I'd like to see Paul de Villiers off the bench, so I think that's an opportunity to see what that looks like. I think Jasper Wiese is our obvious choice at number 8. And again, unless you want to basically rest him, these players don't necessarily need rest. I think we forget that the Japanese players don't play as much as they were, for example, like a Jasper Wiese playing, when he was playing in the Prem and he was playing stupid amounts of minutes. But I think Peter Steph, the toys, playing 3 games, played three full 80s, looking good. I don't think necessarily needs the extra game time. So I think, you can now look at a Ben Jason Dixon at 7. You could look at a Franco Mossad at 7. You could look at a Cameron Harnicorn at 7. You've got options, essentially, within those sort of loose forwards. Same in the utility forwards. Kubas Visa can cover the loose trio, can also go at 7, can go at 4. Janin Vessels covers 2, can cover a loose head as well, and Franco Mossad. So I think that sort of mix of forwards provides basically 2 to 3 players per position. It's 2 hookers only, inverted commas, although Paul de Villiers has been throwing into the line-out, so potentially he might be an option. You've got plenty of props who are your specialist players. If you want to look at who could start in the number 4 jersey, you've got Eben Esebeth who could start there, Luat Diago could start there, Kubas Visa could start there. If you look at the number 5 jersey, or Ben Jason Dixon could also potentially go there. Ben Jason Dixon can go in the 5 jersey, as can Luat, as can Franco. So you've got plenty of options within the forwards themselves. From a backline point of view, I don't think we really need to take much more than 2 scrum offs. I think Morne van den Berg needs game time, given the fact that he hasn't played in a while. And I think Grant Williams is your go-to option, potentially off the bench, unless they want to keep Grant and Kubas here and send Morne van den Berg and Herschel Yankees. I think you always want to send a bit of variety between the two, a bit of variation between what your scrum offs offer. So I think, Morne van den Berg, Grant Williams, 2 different types of scrum offs. Morne van den Berg can be paired with the Herschel Yankees as well, and also offer 2 very different prospects. Marley Ibok and Sash Zulu, I think could be the 2 fly halves to go. I don't see Avusi Moya traveling. He might, if they want to basically, keep the other fly halves here. Sasha definitely needs the game time, and I think Marley Libok, ideally, we'd like to get some more game time into him as well, as I think those are our 2 fly halves for the All Black tests at the moment. Maybe we might see a Andre Pollard, but I think in terms of a pecking order, I think those 2 currently are very much within where we want to see. So centers, the controversial thing is I've said Damon Delendi and JC Creel to stay behind. I think either of them could travel. I'd be surprised if both of them were to travel. So whilst Andre Estes is the only specialist center, even though he's actually a hybrid, you've got options in that Damien Willemse could start at inside center. Ethan Hooker can play at 12 or 13. Kane Moody can also play at 13 as well. So your 13 options are Hooker and Moody within the squad. Your 12 options are Hooker, Moody, Hooker, Willemse, Esterhuizen. Sash could also start 12 if he needed to. You've got 4 options really at wing in Ethan Hooker, Quine Horn, Chase and Colby, Kane Moody. You've got 2 options at fullback in Willemse and Quine Horn, as well as Sasha if needed be. So that's 3 options at fullback. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's basically trying to take a bit of a multi-skilled squad over, and that's a 26 squad, which will cover all your different positions. There are players here that maybe we might not take, and obviously this could be very far from the squad. But I think, given the fact that they've spoken about the fact that the rest of the players want to prepare for the All Blacks, there's definitely certain players who I think will want to try and protect for a week, and players who we obviously deem we can't sort of really lose out on. And I do think JC Creel, Damien Delendi, Peter Steph, the Toy, Kubas Ranik potentially, even Malcolm Marks, you want to go that route. I think they kind of fit into that category. An Oxen Chair. Those are players we really can't afford to use. I similarly think we can't really afford to lose a Damien Willemse, so you could take an upland of Fussy, but you then have to take probably a 12 option potentially. So that's what I've gone with. Could be very different. We'll only find out towards the end of the week is what we are hearing. What change would you make? What would your team look like against Argentina? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.